Hey, what's up, free thinklings? Welcome to another episode of Free Think or Die, hosted by Free Thinking Ministries. Hey, if you strive to avoid the groupthink of mob mentality, then you've come to the right place. I'm Dr. Tim Stratton, and today we're going to be discussing two of my favorite topics with one of my favorite epistemologists. Now, what are these two favorite topics? Well, on the one hand, you've got critical theory or critical race theory. Just maybe you could just call it cultural Marxism. You know, that's the whole big ball of wax there on one side. And then you've got this other thing that I talk about all the time, rationality and knowledge. And the epistemologist that we've got on the show today likes to talk about these things also. Now, perhaps you're sitting there thinking, an what? Yeah, that's right. An epistemologist. These are the kinds of philosophers who study knowledge. And they possess knowledge, the knowledge about how we know things. Well, I occasionally refer to myself as a theological epistemologist, since my PhD work was laser focused on both God's knowledge, namely his middle knowledge, and also what's required for humans to possess reason-based knowledge. That is to say, I studied the nature of both God and man, primarily from a theological perspective, and studied the knowledge possessed by both God and man. So I love studying that stuff. So anyway, although I might be a theological epistemologist, I make sure to surround myself with philosophers who focus on epistemology for a living. And that's exactly what our guest today does for her day job. But hey, before I introduce our guest, make sure to subscribe to Free Thinking Ministries, to this YouTube channel. Subscribe to it, and please like this video. And make sure, whatever you do, ring that bell, because when you ring that bell, you'll get notifications when future videos come out. So you definitely want to do that. And please share this video until it breaks the internet. I think we've come close to breaking the internet a couple times, but it hasn't quite happened. But maybe today's the day. Today's the day to do it. So take this video, share it with your friends, because I think this is important information that we're going to discuss today. Well, with all of that said, and without further ado, please welcome to the show the epistemologist, Kelly Fitzsimmons Burton. There she is.
Hi, Dr. Stratton. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Dr. Burton, how are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, I am honored to have you on the show. You've really done a lot shaping some of my views when it comes to epistemology. So I'm just excited to have this conversation with you today.
That is exciting. I mean, just to be called an epistemologist is kind of exciting.
Isn't that cool? I mean, it's one thing to joke around and say, yeah, I'm a theological epistemologist, but you're the real deal, the philosophical epistemologist. And really, I mean, we're going to talk about why it's so important, why it might be the most important thing to study and to possess knowledge of. So it's always exciting when I get to talk to an epistemologist, but especially an epistemologist that's really kind of shaped my thinking recently. So anything else you'd like to say before we get started?
I would just like to plug my YouTube channel too. If you guys look up my name, Kelly Fitzsimmons Burton, on YouTube, you can find some of the things I've been doing there in epistemology.
And I've been listening to these, watching and listening to the things you're putting out. Fantastic stuff. So highly recommend all the free thinklings out there. Make sure that you subscribe to Dr. Burton's YouTube channel, like her videos, and share them too. Break the internet with her stuff as well.
That'd be rad.
Well, we have a lot to talk about. So I guess the first question I want to ask you is, I like to interview heroes, and anybody that strives to bring God glory by loving God with all their mind. You're a hero to me. So every hero has a good origin story. So you got to share your origin story with us. Tell us about what makes you tick, and most importantly, please specifically tell us about the focus of your work.
Great. Okay. I'm Kelly Fitzsimmons Burton. The students call me Dr. Burton. I've been teaching philosophy and religious studies at the college level for the past 18 years. I know I look young. I am pretty young. I'm married to David Burton, who is a musician and has several new songs coming out. If you want to check those out, his website is dirtroadrecording.com.
Cool.
And we live in Arizona, just north of Phoenix, with our 2 cattle dogs. And I have one laying down on the floor right next to me here who might snore.
Yeah, my dog does the same thing. Can I ask you, though, about your husband? Does he play the intro music for your podcast?
He does. He does.
Yeah,
that's why.
Stuff.
That's called Kelly's theme.
That's called what?
Kelly's theme.
Nice. Yeah, I'd listen to that, and I started it over, listened to it again. I'm like, man, that's good stuff. So yeah, I'm a musician myself. So
cool. Yeah, that cool background you have there. He has a studio on the other side of this wall, and I would be in the cool background, but the lighting in there wasn't so great. So
all right, well, keep going.
Okay, well, when I was 20, I signed up for a philosophy course at the community college. I was an atheist then, but I was really struggling with meaning and purpose in life. And in this class, I was exposed to reason and the idea that we could know things by means of reason. My professor, Dr. Surendra Gangadine, demonstrated how we could know things, and I was blown away. I was a skeptic, right? Nobody could really know anything. And that's what started my journey. Little did I know that reason would lead me to God. I was an atheist. I worked at a record store. I was into the music scene, and I wasn't really interested in being a Christian, but it happened. And I converted from atheism to Christianity. And here's how it happened. I saw that it's clear to reason that God exists, and I was without excuse for not seeing that.
Wow.
And in that context, I saw my need for Christ. And so I submitted myself to reason and the logos, we'll say. How about that?
Yeah.
And I couldn't deal with the fideistic belief that I found in much of what I was exposed to as a new Christian. Fideism is this blind leap, we'll call it. It's a belief without having proof or maybe even understanding what you're committing to. And I saw that. And maybe that's what was turning me off to Christianity at first. So I had just escaped the stifling meaninglessness of skepticism. And so I was opposed to this fideism. It was like the same thing, but with a religious twist. So I made fideism and skepticism both my targets in my work. Both of them deny the possibility of having knowledge. And I had just been exposed to reason and knowledge, and I thought we could know things. Yeah. So that's kind of where my work organically grew out of. It was this experience of coming to know things through reason. And so I love reason. I think reason has been misunderstood, very misunderstood. And I'll be the apologist for reason and the logos. That's going to be my life goal now. And I saw that some things are clear to reason, and if that's true, then fideism in the church and skepticism in the world are errors to be overcome. Yeah. And I like a challenge, so I thought, let's see if we can overcome those errors. So everything I do comes out of this conviction and drive that we can know things, and skepticism and fideism are errors. We don't have to go down those roads.
All right.
I originally wrote my book, Reason and Proper Function, as my master's thesis at Arizona State University 20 years ago.
So that was the book that I first came across and loved it. Yeah.
There's a funny story. Can I tell a funny story?
Sure.
I was trying, I started a publishing company, and I was trying to learn how to do typesetting. It's complicated and it's kind of exciting. And so I needed a large file to upload to practice on. And the largest file I had in my computer was the master's thesis. Yeah. I hadn't read it in 20 years. So I uploaded it and I started working on it, and I started reading it, and I thought, this is really good. What am I doing with this? I should publish it. So I worked it over. I published it thinking, at least I got some practice on typesetting and other things, but I guess some people actually read it, and that was really exciting to me. I thought it was good when I wrote it, but you
So
forget about it and leave it there,
Yeah. What year did you publish it?
A year ago,
Was it only
2019. It was a year
Yeah.
ago. Yeah.
Interesting. So it was just laying there on the shelf for 20 years and nobody knew anything about it until it was
it's right over
resurrected.
here. The original's right over here, and it's
Nice.
ASU binding.
Wow.
Yeah, I think part of it was that I never imagined I'd publish, and I forgot what I had done. You move on to new projects, and so I revisited it, and I thought, this is good, so I'm going to publish it.
Yeah. So that was a response to who?
Alvin Plantinga. So it was my first attempt at addressing what I thought was a popular source of fideism in the church, and Plantinga's epistemology. I know we might want to talk about that.
Let's save it for a little. We'll get into that in a little bit, but yeah. So one more time, I think you mentioned it, but how would you define fideism for our listeners?
I'd say fideism is belief without having proof or maybe even understanding what you're committing to. It's sometimes used, the popular term is blind faith or a leap. And the leap is because you don't have the evidence.
You don't have justification.
Right.
Is that right to say it that way?
I think so.
Yeah,
that's how I've been saying it. Here's how I contrast it with skepticism, and I say it popularly. I know there's some people out there that take issue with the way I say it, but skepticism says nobody can really know for sure.
Yeah.
And I think fideism says nobody can really know for sure, but if we go down that path, that leads to meaninglessness. So we have to believe in something to preserve meaning, and so it seems like maybe Christianity preserves meaning, and so we take that leap, where I don't think we have to take that leap.
Right. I agree. Yeah, I think it's a small step.
Yeah, it's a number of little steps.
Yeah, right. That's well said. So your first published book, was that Retrieving Knowledge?
Yeah, Retrieving Knowledge I published 2 years ago. Retrieving Knowledge, a Socratic Response to Skepticism. This is my first attempt at addressing a deeply rooted skepticism within the Western philosophical tradition. And I think in that book, and I challenge people to check it out, I think I've successfully named the root of skepticism. And I'm willing to argue about that, but I think I have. And in addition, I think I've offered a fresh response to the Gettier problem, which is something I was plagued with as a student.
Okay, well, now you got to tell us about the Gettier problem.
All right.
What is that?
Anyone who studies epistemology knows Gettier. He's a philosopher who wrote a short paper, I think it was in 1966. And the title of this paper is Justified True Belief Knowledge? And in this paper, he both gave us the justified true belief formulation of knowledge, which we are going to talk about.
Yep.
And then he showed that justification is not sufficient for knowledge. And he used an example that I think is not as fun as some of the hundreds of other Gettier examples that came out after him. I can give you one. That's my favorite. I think it comes from Roderick Chisholm, but it's imagine we're out walking and you see what you take to be a sheep on a hill. And you're like, oh, look, there's a sheep on the hill. You form a belief. I believe there's a sheep on the hill. And you walk away with that belief and you think it's true. Well, it is true. There's a sheep on the hill, but behind what you thought was a sheep, that's a sheep-shaped rock. Okay, you see a sheep-shaped rock, but behind the sheep-shaped rock is a real sheep. So the story goes, okay, you see this sheep, so you're justified in believing there's a sheep on the hill, and maybe you smell sheep too, and maybe there's like sounds of sheep, bleating of sheep. So you form the belief there's a sheep on the hill, and it's true, there is a sheep on the hill, and you're justified because your senses are giving you like sheep evidence, but it turns out that you don't have knowledge. And so there's lots of examples like this. Some of them are just ambiguous, but what I did was went through I don't know, about 200 of these examples on the internet. You can find them. There's like a history of the Gettier problem page. And I did an analysis. All of them have two things in common. Okay, three, because sometimes it's ambiguous what is meant by evidence. But they're all based on the senses, evidence through the senses, or testimony from another person whose evidence is probably from the senses. So there's a kind of pattern with these Gettier examples. But what happened was this threw people for a loop. Like, oh my gosh, justified true belief is the definition of knowledge, and it's not sufficient. So what are we going to do? This was the problem when I was a student. And so my professors saw that I was really struggling with this, and they're like, why don't you read Alvin Plantinga? He has a solution. So I read all of his books, his trilogy on warrant, and he kind of changes the focus of the problem by saying justification is not necessary for knowledge. And he gives us what I call the WTB, the warranted true belief formulation of knowledge, as a response to some of these problems that were coming up. And I try to show that Gettier and Plantinga share a mistaken assumption, but you read my book to get the details on that.
All right, that's going to increase the book sales right there.
I hope so, right?
All right, well, okay. Why is the study of epistemology important? I think one of the first things I said is that this might be, the study of epistemology, the study of knowledge, might be the most important field of study out there. So why is that the case? And how would you explain it to somebody who's never heard of epistemology before?
Well, I think one of the most important things, okay, so everybody's currently talking about critical theory, and it almost feels like it just came on the scene out of nowhere. What is critical race theory? What is critical theory? Right. But these ideas have roots and have a historic background. And so I think when epistemology is the study of how we know things. It's about authority. And if we don't have a well-grounded source of authority, then we won't have a well-grounded rest of our worldview. I'll just say it that way. Yeah. I'm trying not to get too technical, but the study of epistemology is important because it's the foundation for our outlook on life. It's the ground. I draw a house for my students. I say, okay, here's the ground. And the ground is your epistemology, how you know things. This is going to determine in a way or be compatible with your view of what is real, which is the foundation. This is metaphysics. I think this is your wheelhouse, right? Metaphysics?
Well, yeah.
God, human nature. And then that sets the pattern for our house, our world and life view, our values, our attitudes, our view of the good life. So if the epistemology is off, then the whole house is going to be off. So if you build your worldview upon sand, it's not going to weather the storm. And not just for individuals. If a culture builds on the sand, then it too will not weather the storm. And I think we're seeing storms today. Yes. Cultural storms, upheavals even. And so epistemology for the individual is a matter of spiritual life or death. And for society, it's going to be cultural life or death. So I think it's the most important thing we can talk about right now.
Yeah, I think you're right. And without epistemology, I love discussing metaphysics, but like you said, if you don't have a good foundation for your metaphysics, then so much for your metaphysics. And it's important for churchgoers too, the average churchgoer who doesn't study philosophy. Well, they should study at least this branch of philosophy just a little bit, because the goal of the Christian is to be a Christ follower and a consistent Christ follower. And I've seen, today I see so many Christians who love Jesus, but they live inconsistent lives. And I think much of this can be boiled down to how they think they know things, and they don't really know what they think they know. So the church and really the whole world needs some help on this. But I do think epistemology is vital. But one thing I do know is be careful how you throw out the epistemology card, because not too long ago I was having an argument with my wife, and I thought, okay, I'm going to get her now. I'm going to just throw out how smart I am. And I said, honey, that's not how epistemology works. And she looked at me and she said, you're about to epistemology me off. And I was like, all right, you win. Game over. I'm not going to do that. I don't know if you've ever done that to your husband, but don't pull that.
I have a little bit to say about this. And Tim, epistemology is also the foundation for wisdom. And you got to know when to use the epistemology card. Yeah.
Well,
my husband's a wise man. So I just kind of try to listen to what he's saying.
Yeah. Well, I learned my lesson, that's for sure. Well, yeah, I first heard of your book and just heard about you through some of our mutual friends not long ago, and so it was right after your Reason and Proper Function book came out. I saw it and I ordered it right away because the title, I was like, wow, that's exactly what I care about. And I had a flight to San Francisco. It's a small book. So everybody out there, I read it from Nebraska to San Francisco, I think in just one trip. So, and I'm not the fastest reader in the world, so you guys can get through it. But I think I took notes on nearly every page and every margin. That's how I just love it. I think I probably spilled more ink in the margins than you did in the book, or at least as much. I don't know. But so anyway, please summarize the main points of that book for our audience.
Okay. Well, like I said, I read Plantinga's Warrant trilogy, and I was disturbed about his epistemology, but also what this was implying for his theology. I thought his epistemology was a logically more basic point, so I tried to figure out what was wrong with it. He calls it reformed epistemology, and I'm reformed, and I can't in any way identify with Plantinga's epistemology. And this is funny because one of my professors was like, he's reformed, why don't you agree with him? And I was like, no, but I'm reformed too, and that's not how I see things. So I see him defining knowledge as warranted true belief in an attempt to support his view of what he calls the sensus divinitatis. And he probably gets this from Calvin, but there are different traditions that follow Calvin. So he's probably more in the Dutch Reformed tradition, and I'm more a Puritan, I'll just say. That's my side of things.
Well, there's definitely Reformed individuals out there who disagree with Plantinga on that score. Yeah, I know some of them in addition to you, but also interestingly enough, my PhD degree is through it's at Northwest University, which is a secular university, but they have a theology department, and the theology department is a staunch Reformed theology department in the Dutch tradition, and so I had to argue some views that weren't really popular there, but at the end of the day, they were convinced enough to pass me. So anyway, sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to.
No, that's interesting and great, because another thing I worked through during the time of writing this was the distinction between the Dutch Reformed epistemology and the sort of old school Princeton epistemology. And my good friend Owen Anderson wrote about that too. So it is a very interesting difference, but it is going back to this sensus divinitatis, or the sense of the divine that we have. So I thought if I could undermine Plantinga's definition of knowledge, it would be a powerful objection to Reformed epistemology, and then we would have to go back and we'd have to reconsider the Gettier problem and find another way to solve that. So, because that's what Plantinga in those trilogies was trying to address. So I thought if I wanted to keep that original definition of knowledge somehow.
Yeah.
So in that book, I took a careful look at what Plantinga meant by warrant. He says something to the effect that a belief is warranted if it is formed by cognitive faculties functioning properly in an appropriate environment and according to a good design plan. That's a summary of his position or his definition, redefinition of knowledge. So my book is a critical analysis of the cognitive faculty of reason. I tried to draw out what Plantinga could mean by cognitive malfunction. I was really curious about that. What is cognitive malfunction? I argue that reason cannot malfunction, but a person using reason may make a mistake in reasoning. They may fail to reason fully. They may neglect reason. But I really tried to probe what could cognitive malfunction be, and particularly reason. And I also argue that if our cognitive faculties cannot malfunction in the way that Plantinga indicates, then we do not need to redefine knowledge or justification. I propose that knowledge is justified true belief with the addition of the carefulness criterion, which is something I kind of made up. But I mean, I heard Gattier's concerns and I thought it should be addressed. So,
right. Well, I love what you said about the carefulness criterion. I think it's key. So yeah, you better at least quickly explain the three ingredients of what is typically and minimally thought of to be essential for knowledge, that justified true belief, and then discuss your carefulness criterion and why that's important.
Okay, so Gettier, I guess Gettier said this. He thinks it goes back to Plato, but that's a long argument in my book where I say, no, that's not what Plato would say. But justified true belief, I'll start with belief. Belief is where we affirm a proposition to be true. Like, I believe the dog is on the floor next to me. Okay, I'm affirming that. The dog is on the floor is a proposition. I'm affirming that when I believe something. We believe lots of things. Something is true when that proposition matches reality. So the dog is on the floor is true if and only if reality is such that the dog is actually there. Right. So truth, I go with the correspondence theory of truth, and I am happy to argue for that theory. And then justification is what ties it down, is what kind of guarantees the belief is true. And this is where we could talk about different kinds of justification. I make a distinction between weak justification and strong justification, where weak justification is evidence that leads to a high probability of truth, and it's probably evidence from the senses, like science gives us. It's not 100% certain, but it's highly probably true. And then strong justification, I say, is by reason and argument such that the contradiction or the opposite position is impossible. And that's rare. That kind of justification is rare, and it's not needed for everything. People get nervous. They're like, oh, Kelly has such a high standard for justification, but it's only for a few things, like the basic things. So the carefulness criterion is where we are careful in forming concepts. We have to do that right now. People are using words like institutional racism, and we have to pause and say, what does that mean? And we really have to probe the definition. That's being careful. Like, do you and I agree on the terms that we're using? And so that's the first thing. When we form ideas and we use words, do we agree? Have we got the same idea in our minds when we use that word? And the second level is, when I make a judgment, have I been careful to see if it's true or not? So this is happening in society a lot now, right now. People are saying there is institutional racism, and some people are saying, well, prove it. Where is it? Show it to me. And so we're asking for arguments from each other. So this is logic. This is basic logic, forming concepts that are, well-formed, clear. And then when we put them together, institutional racism is a reality. Now we can say, okay, that's a judgment. That's a belief. Let's test to see if it's true or not. And we do that by giving arguments and counter arguments. And this is going to require also some intellectual virtues. thinking carefully. We want to have humility. This is really hard right now. Everybody's just very upset and wants to spout off. So humility, a genuine desire to know, patience in conversing with each other. These problems didn't happen overnight, and solutions aren't going to come overnight. And I think the principle of charity, where we give the best possible reading to positions that we don't agree with, is really important for the carefulness criterion, because we like to object, but did we really understand the position, or is it a straw man argument? And so those are just some of the few intellectual virtues that I would say are needed for approaching and gaining knowledge.
Yeah. What do you do when there's a whole bunch of people who aren't willing to be careful and to have that reasonable and logical conversation? Because today, the same people who are making many of these claims that you referenced also say, well, if you appeal to reason or logic or to math or science, that's you just trying to keep your power. That's you just trying to I mean, that's white supremacy, what some people might say. How do you reason with somebody who's not willing to be reasonable? I mean, is it possible?
It is possible. Two things. One, we should find common ground. And this is my other hobby horse besides reason. I'm always talking about common ground. You can find it on my YouTube channel. You have to have common ground. If you don't agree on certain things, like, hey, I'm committed to reason, the laws of thought. If the other person in the conversation is not also committed to reason and the laws of thought and things like integrity, and we're going to talk about the principle of clarity and rational presuppositionalism, if you're not committed to these things, then conversation will be frustrating and counterproductive and will increase skepticism. So first step, find common ground. Second step, if you don't have common ground, you don't have to converse with people. You can walk away. You don't have to engage in every single argument you see on Facebook or Twitter. Be wise in how you engage, because you will get frustrated and burnt out and maybe generate more heat than light.
Yeah. You know, I was having a conversation with somebody just today on Facebook over some of these issues that we are disagreeing on quite a bit today. And this guy said to me, there is nothing you can say to me that would change my mind. And I said, well, I know what it would take to change my mind. Is there anything that could change your mind, or what would it take to change your mind? And I'm still waiting for an answer. But I said, but if you don't even know what it would take to change your mind, if there is nothing that could be said to change your mind, then I tried to communicate that that's kind of the height of irrationality, or being non-rational at the very least. So I don't know.
Can I probe that just a little? I wonder if that comes with a kind of fear, and maybe it's more emotion-based than reason-based, and that's going on a lot right now. I think there's a lot of fear, and if you take this view away from me, where do I go? I'm going to lose meaning, basically. I think we're afraid.
Well, you just hit the nail on the head. This guy loves Jesus more than anybody I know. He's got the biggest heart in the world, but I challenged him. I said, we're supposed to love God with all of our hearts, or with all of our heart and with all of our mind. And I said, honestly, I said, some of the things that you're saying on social media, you're not being a consistent Christian. But I know that nobody loves Jesus more than you. And I can learn, I tried to say, I can learn from how you love Jesus, but we're called to be consistent Christians and to love God with all of our mind. But I think you're right. A lot of it has to do with emotions. And we're emotional beings, and we're rational beings. And I say you don't have to balance them out 50-50 or 60-40 or 70-30 or whatever. We need to be aware of how God has made us. We need to be emotional worshipers of God, and we need to also be good theologians and philosophers and Christian philosophers, and to think clearly about God too. So it's not an either or, it's a both and. That's
it
why
seems like the more you know God, the more you will love God. So you can't separate them, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Amen to that. Well, so let's move on. So I think one of the whenever it was I first reached out to you after reading your little book, and much of what I was writing, I was in the middle of my dissertation at the time. Now, I'll tell you this: I was already done with that segment of the dissertation. I was working on some other issues at that time, and so. But when I read your book, I was like, oh, wow, this supports what I'm working on here and what I've already written. So in the original dissertation, you're not in it, but it's being published by Whiffenstock. And in that version that people can purchase, you're in it. I did add something to it. So
Thank you.
You bet. So I'll explain some of that later. But so regarding the free thinking argument, most of the people that are watching this channel are familiar with the free thinking argument. And if you're new to the show, you can go to freethinkingministries.com. I've written a lot about it there. You can also look at some of the other videos here on this channel and find out more about it there. But I reached out to you to talk about the free thinking argument because that was one of the main focuses of my doctoral work. And so I reached out to you about how the free thinking argument relates to epistemology. So here's my question for you and for the people that already understand it. Do you think the free thinking argument assumes a certain epistemological view, or do you think it's compatible with multiple views?
I'm going to be honest, it's been a little while since I read it originally, but unless you want to restate it, from what I read, I didn't find anything problematic with the free thinking argument. It seems right to me, and I don't see any problems with the argument. Actually, I'm really impressed that you provide arguments. I love arguments, and I tell my students that I collect them like baseball cards. And so I should probably write this one down on a 3x5 note card and memorize it. So no, I don't see the free thinking argument as having any, I don't know, epistemological assumptions, unless you want to say reason and logic are assumptions.
Well, okay. Well, that's basically premise 4, as far as I'm concerned. Premise 4 of the argument the way I originally stated the argument, I've fine-tuned it a bit, but just the way most people know it, it goes like this: if naturalism is true, the soul does not exist. Premise 2 would be, if the soul does not exist, libertarian free will or libertarian freedom does not exist. Premise 3 would say, if libertarian freedom does not exist, then rationality and knowledge do not exist. Now I've since clarified that to make it specific. What do I mean by rationality and at least specific kinds of knowledge? But then I say, premise 4, rationality and knowledge exist. That is to say, it is possible for a human to rationally infer and rationally affirm claims of knowledge. That's basically what I'm saying there. And so I do presuppose it. I think, in fact, to argue against that, I mean, look, if I say premise 4, it's possible to rationally infer and rationally affirm claims of knowledge. If somebody says, no, it isn't, and let me tell you why, well, that's self-defeating, it seems to me. They're assuming it to argue against it. So yeah, I guess as far as epistemological assumptions go, that is something I'm assuming, but it seems to be impossible to argue against it. So it seems maybe it's more than just an assumption. I mean, does being impossible to argue against count as justification for it?
I think so. Yeah.
See, all right.
I mean,
good.
that's what I would say. Yeah. If it's logical opposite is impossible, then that means the contradiction is true.
Yeah.
Almost a necessary truth, right?
It seems to me. Maybe I'm missing something.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I guess, some have said that they think that my argument assumes easy for me to say, an epistemological view called internalism. And if that's the case, then the externalist or any other epistemological view, those folks wouldn't be affected by the free thinking argument. But, I've gone back and forth with some scholars on this, and I really don't think there's a way of escape for anyone, no matter what view they hold. But I guess that leads us to the next question. What are the different the different epistemological options out there. I mean, there's internalism, externalism, reformed epistemology, etc. Do you have more you could add to the list?
Yeah, I think we could probably go with some of the traditional epistemologies that have come up. And they come up, I think, as human beings are trying out logical options. Lately, I've been talking about it as starting with being a human, and human beings appear to have a body. We have sensations, and it appears as though we think. So empiricism and rationalism have been two rival positions in the history of epistemology, where empiricism says all of our knowledge is through the senses. So and then I'm going to say that externalism is usually going with empiricism. Really? All of our knowledge is through the senses. If you can't sense it, you can't know it. Seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. Rationalism historically has said we know by reason, but then the rationalists in the history of philosophy have given reason a bad rap because they create these systems that are, rationally coherent, but they don't touch reality. So there have been problems with rationalism historically. And I'm going to say internalism is probably more in line with rationalism. So the internalism, externalism conflict goes back to empiricism and rationalism. But both of them lead to skepticism when done poorly. So if you think about some of the things you just went through in your argument, if naturalism is true, if all that exists is nature, then human beings are a part of nature, right. And we are sensing beings. We would have to give rational justification for what reason is in terms of material atoms somehow in the void.
Right.
So we really can't know. We can't know anything outside of our senses. So whether there's a God or not is not something we can have access to. Yeah. And other things like moral absolutes or the soul. So empiricism has led to skepticism. Rationalism has led to skepticism. And I argue that right now we're living at the end of an empirical age, and this is the skeptical fallout from that empiricism. The church has gone into fideism as a response, where we really can't know, but if we let go of religion, it's not just Christianity that's fideistic. I mean, anybody who believes anything strongly is probably fideistic if they don't have rational justification. So the original question is, what are the options? Empiricism, rationalism, skepticism, fideism. Tradition, lots of people rely on tradition, the testimony of others. Yeah. I believe it because that's how I was raised. And then another source of knowledge is intuition, or claims knowledge. Intuition, and that's a kind of inner experience. So empiricism is an externally focused experience, where intuition is an internally focused experience. And this is, I think, what the sensus divinitatis really is a form of internal experience. Like, I deep down have this feeling that there's got to be something bigger. And so I just know that there's a God. And I think there is a role for intuition, but I don't know if it's for knowing the most important things in life, because it's very subjective and our intuition can go wrong. Intuition can lead to skepticism as well. So, about Reformed epistemology, I think it is a kind of empiricism. Maybe there's an element of internal experience that is part of Reformed epistemology. For example, Plantinga will say something like, let's say you're in the face of some beautiful place, maybe the Grand Canyon, and you go, wow, I just find myself believing in God given this beauty. And it's sort of, intuition is about sign and reality. So here's this sign, beauty, and it's pointing me to this reality, God. But, you could be there with an atheist and they go, no, that's just a big hole in the ground.
Right.
And now this is interesting about Reformed epistemology. When you have that, it's a counter example, or a defeater to your belief in God. And guess what happens? You have to come up with a defeater now. Right. And that's just justification. So Plantinga kind of lets in justification through the back door when he talks about defeaters.
Interesting.
So he can't get away from it either.
Huh. Because, yeah, so many people say, well, you got to have justified true belief and sometimes more, and you add carefulness. Now, Plantinga, his view said you only need warrant. Is that correct?
Okay. He also says you're warranted. Let's say I do believe in God. I just find myself believing in God, but I meet someone with a defeater. So maybe my atheist friend with, I don't know, the problem of evil. He brings it up. And now I have a defeater to my warrant. So I kind of lose my warrant at that point, and I have to come up with a defeater. And then he talks about defeaters. And so I was like, can't we just get to indefeasibility where we don't have to go through this process? But that's just a strong justification at that point.
Right.
So
that seemed to be justified true belief at that point.
We're giving arguments, right?
Yeah, right. Interesting. So yeah, anything else you'd like to say about Plantinga there?
Well, I do think Plantinga, because I think he is accepting empiricism, that knowledge is through the senses. I think it's going to lead to fideism, and those might be fighting words to some people. That Plantinga, leads to fideism.
Well, as Plantinga would say, why think a thing like that?
Yeah.
In all seriousness, why are those fighting words?
Well, okay, here to me, this is a place where I will fight. Okay. What this means is that if we start with our senses, then it's not clear to reason that God exists. And if we want to believe in God, who's not knowable to the senses, then we have to take that blind leap to get to God. And so belief becomes subjective. And this is really what turns people off. That's your belief. I have my belief. And so if it's not clear to reason that God exists, another problem is it just for God to leave people in their unbelief? Does Plantinga's epistemology lead to universalism when it comes to salvation? These are just some of my worries.
You mentioned somebody looking at a beautiful landscape and, looking at the Grand Canyon and say, wow, God exists. And then somebody else saying it and said, no, atheism's true. This happened merely through naturalistic processes. I actually am acquaintances with the guy, sat next to him on an airplane a few years ago, going to the EPS conference. That year was in San Antonio. And I was on my way there, sitting next to this guy from China. And we started talking, and he told me that he was a Christian because he saw what I was reading. And I said, oh, well, tell me your story. How'd you become a Christian? And he said, well, I was raised in China by atheistic parents, atheistic professors. The government is atheistic, communist. And, everybody from my professors to my parents told me that God doesn't exist. The only thing I knew about God, he said, was that some crazy people in the West believed in God, Santa Claus, and the Easter Bunny. Wow. That's all I was told. And then he said, but you know what? I never believed him. And I said, well, what? You never believed him? He said, yeah, I would look at the sunset over the ocean. And it was so beautiful that I knew an artist was behind it. And then I would study science and I'd look at DNA. And it was so complex. I knew an engineer was behind it. And I said, that's Romans 1:20 in action.
Exactly.
And then he got a full ride scholarship to the University of Oregon. As soon as he stepped on campus, he was met by some college evangelical group there. They shared the gospel with him. And he said, I always knew it was true. I didn't know the details. But the thing with that, though, is as we talked, he seemed to have justification. He might not have gone premise 1, premise 2, conclusion, but he started explaining the justification behind looking at the beautiful scenery. And he gave maybe not a formal argument, but he gave the tether. Was it Socrates that talked about the tether?
Maybe
to tie it down.
Yes,
was it
yes.
It was, yeah.
Yes.
He tied it down, like you said. He gave the justification behind why he thought God exists. So Some might say, well, just as cognitive faculties are functioning properly. And I said, well, yeah, maybe that's probably true, but because they are, he was able to justify it and to tie it down, so to speak. So anyway, I kind of got us off track. But
this makes me think of one more thing about the carefulness criteria that we might want to add, and that is an openness to truth. I think this person probably did not stop with the explanations that were given to him. He thought, you know what? I think there's an alternative explanation. And he thought it through. He was a thinking person looking at, okay, this is how philosophy begins, right? They're like, where did everything come from? And let's see what the options are. So he was given one option and he's like, I'm going to try out the other one. So there's an openness to, I'd say, being and truth. So I do think it happens. And he probably didn't stop there. I mean, it wasn't enough just to know maybe there's a designer behind all this. He probably wanted to know the nature of that being and didn't stop at that answer. He pursued it further.
Right. Yeah, that's what he said when he heard the gospel. He said, I already knew this was true. I just didn't know the details. So yeah, it makes perfect sense. All right. So you gave a list of different epistemological options. What specific view do you hold, and why do you hold it?
Okay, well, I hold to a position called rational presuppositionalism, which is a method for what?
What, are you a pre-supper? You're a pre-supper.
Yeah, right. Let me tell you about that. This is a method for understanding in a step-by-step fashion, and it starts from what is more logically basic to what is less logically basic, like a staircase. We start with the most basic and we build step by step until we get to God, maybe. This is, okay, so two things. Logically basic is not the same as properly basic. We can talk about that distinction.
Okay.
And rational presupposition is not to be confused with Van Tillian presuppositionalism, which is another position that I think leads to fideism, but that's another talk altogether. Yeah.
Well, maybe I'll have you back on the show to talk about that sometime.
Not my wheelhouse, but yeah.
All right.
All right. So presuppose just means prior to, right? It's what we, it's a belief before. So it doesn't have to be presuppositionalism, but notice the rational before the presuppositional. So we all have basic beliefs, and this may be what Plantinga calls a properly basic belief. But rational presupposition will try to give rational justification for our basic belief. So God exists. I don't just find myself believing that. I mean, some people may. I want to argue that that position is the only position. So I have to rule out other options. So it's a method. Rational presuppositional is a method for A, getting back to what is more basic, and B, arguing for our presuppositions using reason. Can I give an example?
Please do. Yeah.
All right. So for example, it is self-evident that we think. We're doing it right now. And if you doubt it, you're still doing it. So it's self-evident. We can't doubt that we're thinking without thinking. So.
Right.
So we can start there. And it's self-evident that there are laws of thought. I don't know if you want me to mention the laws of thought.
Yeah, do. Please.
The laws of thought are the law of identity, which says A is A thing is what it is, dog is dog. The law of non-contradiction, which says something is not both A and non-A in the same respect and at the same time. The dog is not both a dog and non-dog. And the law of excluded middle, which says something is either A or it is not A. Either it's a dog or it's a non-dog. So
yeah, what would you say about the law of the excluded middle? A lot of times I like to define it as a statement is either true or false. What do you think of defining it that way?
True or non-true? Because what if it's neither true nor false? So,
okay.
But yeah, that's it makes sense to say that.
Okay.
But some things are neither true nor false. Like,
I mean, some people try to give like quantum mechanics as a defeater to that, and so they'll say the law, or quantum mechanics has shown that the law of the excluded middle is false, and I'll say, well, is that statement that you just said true or false? Maybe I should say true or not true. And so they're still presupposing the law of the excluded middle, at least in a sense.
Yeah. This is just this topic I spent 15 podcast episodes on in on my YouTube channel. There's a playlist called Retrieving Reason. Yeah. And I just kind of went over everything I know about reason on that podcast, and I'm writing that up as a book. So, but good. Yeah, if you want more about this conversation and how it might apply to things like critical theory, that's my long version of reason. What is reason? Right. So we were talking about it's self-evident that we think, and it's self-evident that there are laws of thought. And so this is rock bottom, most basic in epistemology. If we can't agree on those two things, then there's no building. Yeah,
I think you're exactly right. Like I said, that's basically premise 4 of the free thinking argument. So call me a rational presuppositionalist. I'm right there with you.
We made a convert. Okay. So that some things are self-evident, we can say this is what the principle of clarity is. So when I was mentioning common ground, I mentioned the principle of clarity. So the principle of clarity is that some things are clear to reason, like it's clear to reason that I'm thinking right now. Mm-hmm. So it's clear that we think, it's clear that there are laws of thought, and to deny this is absurd. It leads to absurdities. Mm-hmm. From there, we can say that some things are clear to reason because the opposite, the contradiction, is nothing is clear to reason. And if we were to follow that line, then we can't even begin talking. If nothing is clear to reason, then the distinction between A and non-A is not clear. What I'm saying right now is not clear. So to say anything is to affirm some things are clear to reason. Mm-hmm. And so, then from here, we could move on to other things that are clear to reason. Remember, I was mentioning a step-by-step process. So we can say, maybe we want to say something is eternal. It's clear to reason that something must be eternal because the contradiction, nothing is eternal, is not logically or metaphysically possible. And I'm thinking there's probably some videos on my YouTube channel about that too, if you want to get into it. But we're talking about rational presuppositionalism. So what it is it in a step-by-step process, we can get to what is eternal. We can get to, it's clear that God is eternal. And maybe that's the most controversial thing I'm saying today is clear to reason that God is eternal and only God is eternal. Nothing else can be eternal, not matter, not my soul. So we have to go through a series of arguments.
Right.
And this is how Socrates often argued, by eliminating the contradiction. Mm-hmm. And so rational presuppositionalism has the advantage of a step-by-step process and by learning from the errors of history, because we've seen the logical options come up in history. Yeah. And so we've seen the problems with them. And so we can say, no, those are meaningless and they don't provide the justification we're looking for. So we have an alternative to the above epistemological approaches are the ones we've mentioned earlier. And these approaches don't deliver on knowledge. And so hopefully rational presuppositionalism will deliver the goods on knowledge about the basic things like the existence of God, human nature, which I think is key to your conversation, and what is good for humans and what is evil for humans. Those are the basic things that we want to know about in philosophy.
That's right. So I guess I got a few things I could say right now. I guess first, would it be fair to say that if one argues against rational presuppositionalism, that they're actually assuming rational presuppositionalism?
Yes, Tim. And I do have some opponents out there that are trying to do this, and they don't even understand that they're doing this.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, it seems clear to me that would be the case. I mean, I think they could state the opposite, state the negation, but to try to argue against it seems that they would be holding the same view they don't like. But like I said, premise 4 of the free thinking argument basically states that it is possible to rationally infer and rationally affirm knowledge claims. And if one argues against it, they're affirming what they seek to oppose. So I want to give you another argument that I've worked on. A lot of people know about the free thinking argument, but another lesser known argument that I have is one that I refer to as the proper function and freedom argument. It's similar. It's the cousin, I would say, to the free thinking argument, but it goes like this. It's just 3 steps. So premise 1, for any human X, X's cognitive faculties are designed to function properly in an appropriate environment. 2, for any human X, if X's cognitive faculties are designed to function properly in an appropriate environment, then through a mature conscious process of properly functioning faculties, X can reject irrational thinking in favor of rational thinking. So you have a couple options there, rational thinking or irrational thinking. So then conclusion, therefore, for any human X, X can, through a mature conscious process of properly functioning faculties, reject irrational thinking in favor of rational thinking. This entails libertarian freedom. So let me quickly fly over this thing. It seems properly basic, I would say. Maybe we should say a rational presupposition. But I've said in the past that it seems properly basic to affirm that if one does not possess the ability to reject incoherent thinking in favor of coherent thinking, then something seems to have gone terribly wrong with his or her cognitive faculties. And if one asserts that this ability is not necessary to gain reason-based knowledge, they seem to be affirming that they themselves do not possess the ability to judge and evaluate this particular premise as good, bad, better, the best, true, or false. Note the range of alternative options from which to choose. And if one does not possess this ability, then he stands in no position to know if he or she should disagree with this premise or not. I mean, if one's nature does not allow one to judge a premise as false when it actually is false, then one has severe rationality problems, or so it seems to me. Be that as it may, I'd say it's properly basic or perhaps a rational presupposition that at least some humans do possess the ability to make these evaluative and rational judgments. In fact, if one objects to this premise, he or she seems to actually be affirming the same premise. That is to say, it's self-defeating to affirm determinism. And another epistemologist, Robert Locke, I think that's how you say his name, he concludes that if one affirms determinism, then one cannot be epistemically justified in her embrace, adoption, articulation, and defense of determinism. That's from his book Free Will and Epistemology, page 231. So anyway, it seems to follow that if one's noetic structure is functioning properly, then libertarian freedom is a vital ingredient to the rationality mix, at least when it comes to certain kinds of knowledge. So it stands to reason that if the ability to be a free thinker has been lost, one is not free to employ the use of reason, at least in appropriate circumstances, then something seems to have damaged one's thinking faculties. So anyway, I could go on and on and on. I could read you my dissertation, but it's not about me today. It's about you. So with that in mind, here's my next question for you, Kelly. What do you think about that argument for improper function, and that it entails the freedom to think, or at least the freedom of intentionality? One time you and I were talking, and you used that phrase, the freedom of intentionality. I don't know if you remember that, and that kind of stuck with me too. So what do you think?
No, I have a lot of thoughts about it, and it might be like a long discussion, but I think a couple things. I would like to know what you mean by your cognitive faculties, and what do you mean by they function properly? I'm just going to be honest. I have always wondered, what are my cognitive faculties? What are they? And how do I know if they're functioning properly?
Yeah. Okay. So proper function, I guess. So as you know, Plantinga contends that a true belief counts as knowledge if said belief is formed by, you said earlier, cognitive faculties functioning properly in an appropriate environment, and according to a good design plan. Did I miss anything?
Nope, that's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So anyway, I argue and attempt to show at least a theist, because atheists do not typically believe humanity was intelligently designed to function properly. I mean, maybe you could find, maybe they believe we're created by aliens or something, but most most atheists aren't going to say that we were intelligently designed to function properly. So yeah, I attempt to show that at least sometimes proper function requires freedom in a libertarian sense. So this could mean an ability to think otherwise, but it definitely means that an agent can't possess knowledge if exhaustive determinism is true.
Yeah.
And I'll make that point and I got a lot of mileage out of one of your quotes with this too, but I'll make that point if it's physics and chemistry running the show, if it's a mad scientist running the show, if it's God, whatever it is, if something other than me is causing and determining everything I think and believe, then there's problems. And I like to summarize it like this. If something outside of human control causally determines you to affirm a false belief, then it's impossible for you to infer or affirm a better or true belief. So, I point out that if naturalistic determinism is true, then all human thoughts and beliefs are causally determined by the forces of nature, the initial conditions of the Big Bang, past events, perhaps some quantum mechanics, and whatever is all these things outside of human control. They causally determine everything about me and everything about humanity. So since these naturalistic events are not intentionally aimed at truth, then human thoughts and beliefs are not reliable in the sense of being truth conducive. Now, this is kind of similar to Alan Plantinga's evolutionary argument against naturalism, but I actually think it's a bit stronger, because on the evolutionary argument against naturalism, which I think is a great argument, by the way.
Yeah.
But because he demonstrates that human beliefs aren't aimed at truth, they're aimed at survival, and they're not the same thing, and so they're not reliable. Well, when you dig a little bit deeper on atheistic naturalism, our beliefs aren't aimed at anything. It's just the fizzing and popping of physics and chemistry, right?
Yeah.
And so they're not aimed at anything. Now, I also go on to explain that theological determinism, or what I call exhaustive divine determinism, has similar problems regarding reliability, because if exhaustive divine determinism is true, then God always causally determines all thoughts and all beliefs all the time. So, initially, one might think that this is unproblematic, since God is an intentional agent who has the ability to aim at truth. The problem, however, is that if this view were true, it's obvious that human beliefs would not be aimed at truth, but rather aimed at God's will.
Yeah.
And they never miss. They're completely reliable when it comes to that, if exhaustive divine determinism is true. But they're not reliable when it comes to truth. They're reliable at always hitting dead center of God's will. And given the preponderance of, I like to say it this way, given the preponderance of a plethora of disagreeing views about theological issues, even among Christians, it stands to reason that God's will is not necessarily for humans to affirm true theological beliefs. And this also includes the beliefs regarding these issues that we're talking about right now. So it follows that theological thoughts and beliefs, not to mention a multitude of other thoughts and beliefs regarding other issues, aren't reliable in the sense of them conducing to truth. On exhaustive divine determinism, God causally determines many people, really all people, to affirm false beliefs, since nobody's omniscient. And it's fair to say that everybody's got at least some false beliefs. So if that's the case, then say goodbye to reliability. But anyway, the free-thinking argument and others that I've offered, I think they talk about defeaters. I think they provide a forceful defeater against an external, a view of externalism, or what I call a passive external reliability, and the importance of being able to think and deliberate in a libertarian sense. So, wow. Okay, I'm talking way too much. What do you think?
I think I have a lot of thoughts about that, but one of the things I hear you saying is that maybe we want to save freedom. Freedom of thought is one of those self-evident things that we want to. I mean, if I'm a person and my thoughts are my own, which it sure seems that they are, then I am free to change my mind, right? And
You'd
if
hope
God's
so, yeah.
causally, I mean, this is, I think, where the fideism I'm worried about is coming in. We can't say goodbye to reliability, you said earlier. So if we can't, we just have to, I don't know, have a hope and a prayer maybe. But
Well, and that prayer wouldn't even be up to you. Something would
yeah,
cause that.
yeah. I can I just put this in here for a future discussion?
Yeah.
I think one of the problems that happens, I'll put it back to Occam, is the emphasis on the will rather than the emphasis on reason. And this is something I'm currently researching. What happened in the history of Western philosophy that we put the emphasis on the will, particularly in German philosophy? And it comes down through Nietzsche, and it comes down through the Frankfurt School and critical theory. So I think you may be hitting on something that I'm also hitting on,
Really?
where we kind of abandon reason, and it goes back to the nature of God too. So I think we probably have some work we can do in researching that together.
Yeah.
But back to the free thinking argument. Here's what I would say. I think our nature as rational beings entails the freedom to think. I also think we always have the capacity to freely exercise our reason, and the capacity is not the same as the exercise. Human beings, by nature of being human, have the capacity, but that capacity could be hindered. Maybe that's what we want to say is cognitive malfunction sometimes. Maybe I have a brain lesion. Maybe I'm drunk. I don't know. So our capacity could be hindered, but we have the capacity.
Yes.
But we don't always exercise that capacity. And this could be an interesting conversation. The difference between having the capacity and exercising it.
Amen. Amen to that. I mean, I agree that we don't always do so, but there are times when we don't exercise our reason that we could have.
Yeah.
And so that gets us into responsibility right now. And that's also, I mean, you start talking about critical theory and critical race theory. I mean, there's this big conversation about responsibility, and that, you know, the idea of responsibility is racist. And I mean, it's just crazy, but this gets us into what it means to be a free thinker, what it means to have knowledge, what it means to be responsible. But anyway, you know, I just want to point out that you are Reformed and also affirm libertarian freedom. So you're in good company with guys like Greg Kokel and also people like me. So, I mean, again, I say that I'm Reformed, but I love when people are like, yeah, you know what? I can be Reformed and also affirm libertarian freedom. Anyway, I think you'd be a good Molinist. I don't know how you feel about that, but I think you can be a Calvinist and a Molinist. Definitely you can be Reformed, practice Reformed theology, and also be a mere Molinist is what I like to say. So we'll have to have that conversation some other time.
Well, I'll just put this in there. I would say I hold to the Westminster Confession of Faith more than Calvin. And so if you can square Molinism with Westminster Chapter 9, Westminster Confession Chapter 9, we'll talk further.
All right, let's do it. That sounds like a great conversation. All right. Okay, so next question. In your book, it seems that you argue that knowledge requires 1, appropriate reasons, 2, true beliefs, and 3, carefulness. So would you also affirm that our God-given image of God faculties, and you asked what is a faculty, but let's say it that way. I mean, would you affirm that our God-given image of God, call it a faculty if you will, has got to be functioning properly?
I would say that our God-given rational faculties always functions properly and is the basis for moral accountability. And this is the very problem I had with planting his view. If my cognitive faculties, particularly reason, could malfunction such that I don't believe in God when I ought to believe in God, then I have an excuse for my unbelief. I can blame God for it. You gave me faculties that malfunctioned. So I think moral evil consists in our having the capacity to use reason, the freedom to use reason, the clarity of general revelation. You mentioned Romans 1:20 earlier, and we still failed to know God regardless. I think we have we don't have an excuse. Whereas I think perhaps if I had cognitive faculties that malfunction, I could say, well,
Okay.
sorry, God, I couldn't believe in you.
Right. Now you say God-given rational faculties always function properly, but surely, but there's people out there who do not possess properly functioning faculties. Seems
now we have to back up and say, what do we mean by faculty?
Well, okay, but what I mean, like with people who have suffered severe head trauma or something. What would you say?
So let's think this through a little bit. Is there a difference between a malfunctioning brain and malfunctioning reason? This gets us into questions about where our faculties are located, or I locate them in the conscious part of us, call it the soul or the mind. Right. What is soul malfunction? I would say it's the failure to use reason at the basic level. You have this capacity and you didn't do it. It is to neglect or avoid or resist or even deny reason in the face of what is clear to reason. And it has consequences, natural consequences, and it may be like a death spiral. So it results in meaninglessness, where less and less meaning because we haven't been searching for meaning. And boredom, because when things are meaningless, we get bored. And when we get bored, we can't stand it. We're the kinds of beings that need meaning, and so we go into excess. Oh, well,
I just got to say, I don't think I've been bored for the past decade since I've started this study. I forgot what boredom was like.
I don't even know anymore. No way. And then when we're bored and we fill it with excess, we waste our time, our effort, our life, and we feel guilty because we did it to ourselves. And this is a kind of spiritual death. And it's not something God does to me. It's something I did because I didn't use my reason. So it does seem like God holds people accountable. There's a natural consequence. If you don't use your reason, you won't find meaning. But I don't know if God's going to hold me responsible for, I don't know, having memory loss from head trauma or I don't know. Think about head trauma. What's going on there? It's natural evil, and perhaps it's the kind of thing God uses to get us to use our reason. I don't mean to sound harsh, but natural evil or physical malfunction. My brain is physical, right? Should call us to tend to moral evil or cognitive narding. I call it neglect, avoid, resist, and denying reason. So it seems like the fit between reason and meaning and the existence of natural evil is a kind of perfect design and a perfect environment for people who don't want to use their reason, but there is a loving God who is not going to let you get away with it.
So could one have a brain tumor, for instance, that just is doing something in the brain? So, I mean, I'm a substance dualist. I believe that the soul uses the brain
Sure, I am too.
In the same way that a pianist uses a piano. And if the piano is damaged, then the pianist has all kinds of problems. So let's say there's a brain tumor in somebody's brain, and it's not allowing the soul, if you will, to connect the logical dots to reach rational or logical conclusions somehow. I don't know how that works. What would you say in that instance? Did they have properly functioning faculties then? Even if the soul is freed from the body, as J.P. Moreland once said, you'd be thinking quite nicely at that point. But it's not at that point. So
I'm not sure. Here, I'll give you a more relatable example for me. I yesterday was having a bad day, and I was thinking, boy, my mind is mush. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that show with Tim. And it was a physical thing, right? And so I said, I'm going to eat a good breakfast and get some good sleep, and I'll be, on top of my game. So there is a connection between our mind and our body. But is it ever to such an extent that we can't affirm A as A? See, this is what I explore in that Reason and Proper Function book. What does it mean to have a malfunctioning cognitive faculty? I would say maybe there are people who have the capacity, but the capacity is severely hindered. I would say those are the exception to the rule, not the rule.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
God probably isn't going to hold people to the same level of accountability. So maybe, I mean, is that person having meaninglessness to the same extent to the teenager in my class who isn't using their reason?
Yeah, I've talked a lot about how God would judge those who haven't yet reached the age of accountability. They're, perhaps they've never thought about logic before, how to reach rational conclusions. Definitely infants and toddlers, or those who have suffered some kind of head trauma. Ultimately, we don't need to get into this now, but I think middle knowledge can help answer some of these things. But that's a topic for another conversation. But something else you said, it seems to me that there's some folks out there today, and maybe I think of guys like Pharaoh in the Old Testament, where the author is clear that Pharaoh hardened his own heart, and I'd say, and also his mind, and then says that God hardened his heart as well. So, is there a way to make sense of both of those? And I think the answer is found in middle knowledge. But let me say this: you mentioned something about perhaps it's the case. Like, let's just talk about atheists, for example, that they resisted reason and they didn't have to. So there was a resistance, but they had the freedom, the libertarian freedom, not to. And they resisted it long enough that pretty soon now there's something about their thinking process. I don't know if sometimes it seems impossible to reason with them. I was talking to somebody today on Facebook, another person, and it seemed impossible to reason with them. I finally just put a GIF up there of a guy talking to a brick wall because I had nothing else I could say. Maybe that wasn't nice, but it seems that some people just don't have the ability, maybe their cognitive faculties, whatever those are, damaged, but they use their freedom to damage it. I don't know. What do you think? Yeah.
I'd like to go back to Pharaoh because I think that's a good example. What's going on in that story is that he is receiving revelation directly from God in the form of miracles. This is like the word of God coming to him directly. And so it is, I think it's the same thing for us too, not like a divine command from God, but the word of God, if we think of it in a broad sense, it is what we're facing. And you can either accept the word or reject the word. And Pharaoh is hardening his heart in rejecting that word that's coming to him. And God is hardening his heart insofar as God is not giving him the grace to accept that word. So I think we need to, I know this is a theological piece now, and I was just doing epistemology, but I think we have to talk about grace as an aspect of people accepting the word, I'll call it the logos, using your reason. If you're dead, you're not using your reason at the basic level. And if you're dead and not using your reason at the basic level, you can't bring yourself back to life. Dead people don't raise themselves. So there's an element of grace in using reason. And I think we have to recognize that.
But even Calvin and Luther and Melanchthon would say that those who haven't had any of that divine grace when it comes to salvation, how to think clearly regarding salvation issues, would still have that freedom. They didn't use the words libertarian freedom, but when you read them, they're talking about libertarian freedom. And I talk about this in my upcoming book. But they would say that they have that kind of rational presupposition, if you will, and ability to think regarding things of the world. Yeah. So, for example, atheists can also invent, atheists can get us to the moon and do surgery just like a Christian can, sometimes better. So,
I would
go ahead.
I would think that the person, let's just say a person in unbelief, they have the freedom to change their mind. The piece that you want to wonder is, why don't they then? And sometimes they want to give an argument about why they're not free to use their reason, but you're doing it right now. So we do have the freedom, and we come up with all kinds of arguments and excuses. I mean, sometimes arguments for atheism are really good arguments. They're just kind of excuses. So why can you argue in that level, but not at the level of, proving? Can you prove that God is? I guess you can't prove that God's not real, but can you prove that matter's all there is?
Yeah.
You're using reason to do that. What,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's an assumption.
Yeah.
Right. You can't prove that.
So rational presupposition is saying, let's go back to those assumptions and argue for the assumptions. And I think everybody, let's say everyone capable of doing so can do so. I mean, if you're a teenager and you're in my class, or a 20-year-old in my class who wants to argue with me, you're doing it. So why can't you do it at that level of belief or unbelief?
Yeah. Well, we might have to do another show on this topic too, because this is amazing, and we could probably spend at least 2 hours on that. But I would like to maybe wrap up in the next 20 or 30 minutes, if that's all right with you. But when I first asked you if you'd let me interview you on my show, you said, yeah, that's cool, but I've got some questions for you. So now's the time of our show where the guest interviews the host. And so take your best shots, Dr. Burton.
Excellent. Because I'm a teacher and I love to ask the questions.
That's right.
It's not usually me answering questions. I'm usually asking the questions.
Yeah.
All right. First question. Who were our mutual friends that recommended the book? Because I'd like to thank them. Yeah.
I believe it was a while ago, but I think it was maybe a combination of David Paulman and Sean White, both individually. It wasn't at the exact same time. Now, David Paulman, I believe, is a student at Trinity Theological Seminary, and I just started working there as an adjunct professor. So I'll probably have him in my class, but he's doing some great work out there.
Yes.
He's tearing it up, and I'm following him. I'm learning a little bit from him too, but he's not going to get a free pass in my class. I'm going to make him work.
Good.
In my class, but he's doing some great work. And Sean White, I saw him saying some things about you, or good things in your work. And he's a good friend back from the Biola days, and we've gone through some training with Frank Turek and stuff too together. Love that guy. So those guys sing your praises, and I thought, well, if these guys are singing your praises, I better look into that. So.
Well, thank you, David Paulman and Sean White. David Paulman's I don't know, I know him from Facebook.
Yeah.
And last night he sent me a picture of my other book, what's that one called? Retrieving Knowledge. He sent me a picture and said he's reading it. And I said, I want your feedback. I want, and Sean White's he's my brother. He's my big brother. So yeah.
You guys both live in the same area, right?
We both live in Phoenix, and we've done some apologetics work together. So
very nice.
So what drew you to my little book?
Well, like I said, my studies over the past several years have been focused on reason and rationality and knowledge. The kinds of knowledge God has, the kinds of how we gain at least reason-based knowledge. I've been studying this stuff since probably 2012. And so that led me dipping my toes into the waters of epistemology and studying proper function. So when I saw the title of your book, Reason and Proper Function, I was like, man, those are two of my favorite topics. I got to check it out.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for reading it. And I want to know, what is your take on Planting as epistemology? What do you think about him? Not him personally, but his epistemology.
No, he's great. And if you want to know, I think nobody has a better philosophy when it comes to air conditioners.
Oh, yeah, that's so funny.
Have you seen that?
Yes.
Google Alvin Plantinga and air conditioning, and you'll see a good video. I actually put Alvin Plantinga as, I wrote an article 2 or 3 years ago. I think it was called My Mount Rushmore of Apologetics. And on my Mount Rushmore was William Lane Craig, J.P. Moreland, Mike Licona, because of his resurrection work, particularly, and Alvin Plantinga. that doesn't mean I always agree with all of them. I don't. Even Dr. Craig, I have some disagreements with him, but not much at all. I agree more with Dr. Craig than anybody else probably on the face of the planet. But I can find Dr. Craig and I have had some fun debates between the two of us too. But I would say when it comes to the problem of evil, I really built on, in my dissertation, I talked about how an understanding of free will and God's middle knowledge can really solve all these problems of evil. Well, I stood on the shoulders of Alan Plantinga there. I think I argued a bit differently, but I couldn't have done it without him. I, again, stood on the shoulders of giants there. And I really do like the evolutionary argument against naturalism because it shows if atheistic naturalism were true, our beliefs are aimed at survival, not truth. And so I was able to stand on his shoulders there to spin it off and go even deeper with the free thinking argument against naturalism. So I love the guy. So about when it comes to properly functioning faculties, I think there's something to it, but I'm definitely not all in, I guess you could say. I mean, I'm not an externalist in the sense that I would think that externalism explains knowledge exhaustively. I would reject that view. To say that externalism can explain all kinds of knowledge all the time, I don't like that. I am open to the idea of externalism or giving warranted true belief on some things that perhaps I don't need to have justification for. I just don't think I'm not interested in those kinds of things, I guess. Yeah. So I'm open. Let me say it this way. I'm open to externalism making sense of some kinds of knowledge, but I don't think it can make sense of all kinds of knowledge. And I'm even open. I'm not going to affirm it, right? You'd probably disagree with this, but I'm open to the idea that knowledge of God is properly basic. I'm open to that. But I'm particularly focused on the importance of some of these other kinds of knowledge. So I also affirm that there's such things, I was calling them properly basic beliefs. But it seems that your view holds something similar. Maybe I'm saying it wrong. I guess I was kind of thinking properly basic beliefs and rational presuppositions might be the same thing.
Well,
how would you distinguish?
Yeah. Because I think Plantinga says things like the existence of other minds, the existence of the material world, memory beliefs, right. God, the existence of God. These are properly basic. Now, rational presuppositionalism is going to say, hey, wait a minute. In the history of philosophy, the existence of other minds has been doubted. These are things that people have doubted. The existence of the external world for sure has been doubted.
Right.
Just study Hinduism, Vedanta philosophy. So,
there's even Christians that doubt reality.
So these are things that need to be argued for, and in such a way that the opposite is impossible. And Professor Gangadine has done that, I think, successfully in his book. I'm going to just tell you the title: Philosophical Foundation, a Critical Analysis of Basic Beliefs, where he's going through historic positions and showing where they ultimately have to give up reason. And at that point, it's not a logical option. So that's the difference between properly basic and what I was calling logically basic. So some things are logically basic insofar as if you doubt this, you lose all meaning. Where I think Plantinga means properly basic is a belief we find ourselves with, but those beliefs often have defeaters, and we have to give a defeater. And so here we are back to arguing again.
Okay.
And you might say, I might be willing to say, yeah, belief in God is properly basic insofar as I've never had to deal with defeaters. Maybe I'm raised Christian and I can't doubt it. But once I, get to the college classroom and have my philosophy professor starting to ask hard questions, then boom, my warrant is gone.
Oh yeah, right.
So that's, I think, what happens to a lot of people. We rely on these properly basic beliefs, and then we get a defeater and we're frazzled. Like, what do I do now? So
Yeah, and I think, it's similar to what I was talking about earlier. I think many people have this belief in God. They haven't maybe faced these defeaters, but they almost subconsciously have gone through the arguments, I think. One time I gave a sermon at my church when I was still on staff as a pastor. I was the youth pastor at the time, and, you don't get a lot of opportunities to give sermons, and had my shot, and I was at Biola at the time. And so I talked about knowledge and what it means to have knowledge of God, and that we have good reasons for the knowledge of God. And I was actually called in to have a conversation with some of the others on the pastoral staff, and a couple people that were attending church that really didn't like that. And they were like, I don't need all these reasons and arguments. And I said, well, that's cool. You don't have to have them. And I said, but why do you believe? She goes, because of the Holy Spirit. And I said, well, isn't that a good reason? And she was like, well, yeah, that's a great reason. And I started asking her, well, why is that a good reason? And she starts giving me justification for all of this. So anyway.
That's what humans do. That's what we do.
Yeah. And I think, these folks they had done almost subconsciously gone through these arguments, even if they weren't really aware of it. So, but it doesn't mean they really didn't still do it. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe we need to flesh that out more. But I guess basically what I've really specifically argued against is the idea or the view that properly functioning faculties are compatible with exhaustive determinism, especially exhaustive divine determinism. I've talked a lot about that on our YouTube channel. If people want to go find out more about that. We have reliability issues, and nothing really seems to be functioning at all if one does not possess the ability to reject bad thinking or incoherent ideas in favor of better or true beliefs. And that seems biblical. I mean, Paul tells us to take every thought captive to obey Christ in 2 Corinthians 10:5. And then he warns us that we can be taken captive by bad thinking in Colossians 2:8. This shallow philosophy. And so it's the battle of the mind where this takes place. And we can be taken captive, or we can take captives when it comes to our thinking. But anyway, if determinism is true of any flavor, then we got problems with that. And this is where I've got a lot of mileage from your quote. Let me get your quote up here. You said, now I got to say, I added a word in here, but I asked you if that was okay once, and you seemed to give me your thumbs up. So you said proper function of our cognitive faculties must first rule out the deterministic influences of outsiders, such as Alpha Centaurion, cognitive scientists, Cartesian evil demons, and also internal influences such as a brain lesion or even the influence of mind-altering substances. All of these influences may cause or causally determine one's faculties to fail to function properly. So that's from Reason and Proper Function on page 23. And I like to share that. And that's the quote I put in my book.
Well, thank you for using that. Yeah. I don't want to talk more about that quote right now. I was just going to say, I think there's a distinction we could make between things that happen to us physically and things that happen to us inside our own minds, So I think we do kind of have some control over what goes on in our own minds. Yes. I even tell my students, sometimes when I'm taking a shower, I hear this voice in my head and I have to say, is that my thought or is that someone else's thought? We can check though, right? We can check and say, oh, that's not something I would think.
Right. Yeah, we can take that captive.
Somebody else. Hey, do you guys see that over there, or is it just me? So I think we do have the freedom to think our own thoughts and critically think about what's in our head right now.
Yeah, and I just say libertarian freedom, the ability to be a libertarian free thinker is vital and essential if that's the case.
All right.
Yeah.
What is your preferred epistemology, if I can ask it that way?
Yeah, well, okay. I like to think of rationality and knowledge like a day at the gun range. For those who don't know, I love to compete in what's called USPSA pistol competition. So it's kind of like John Wick stuff. Have you ever seen John Wick?
I have not, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, so Keanu Reeves, it's great. So some targets are like 3 feet away. And those are the fun ones. They're basically impossible to miss. Even a beginner has to try, it seems, to miss these targets. So, and let's make the illustration even more extreme. So imagine standing right next to a broadside of a barn. You're 3 yards or less away from the broadside of a barn. And then they say, now shoot the barn. Now, a properly functioning human has to go out of their way to miss that target. But, it just, to me, if there's such a thing as proper function, like I said, you're just going to hit that target. And if you don't, then there's either something physically wrong with you, or you're trying not to for some reason. But then we have targets that are maybe, say, the size of a dinner plate, 10 yards away. Those, and then 15 yards away, 20 yards, even 25 yards away. Now, at 25 yards away, most beginners aren't going to hit that target. It takes some carefulness and some training. It takes hours and hours and hours and days and, of practice. Taking lessons from those who know, from experts, to how to have all these little proper shooting mechanics. You don't even think about it. Isn't it just pointing the gun and pulling the trigger? Yeah, but if you want to be good, there's much more than that. So sometimes we take shots with our, I just last week I was taking shots with my pistol at 50 yards away at a torso-sized target. Now, this is a challenge for even seasoned shooters and competitors. Now, I got to tell you, when I got my Glock 34 and a red dot on it, that's a competition gun with a red dot scope or an optic on it, it's still a challenge for me. It's not easy, but there's a carefulness criterion here to those kinds of shots. When there doesn't seem to be a carefulness factor when it comes to hitting the broadside of a barn from 3 yards away, there is a carefulness factor hitting that 50-yard shot, and I can do that consistently because I've been very careful and I've done the work and I've trained. I've done my due diligence, right? So I think of warranted knowledge and reason-based beliefs in similar ways. We possess properly basic, or at least I should say, perhaps we possess properly basic beliefs. And other knowledge that is based upon those beliefs, like maybe a 10-yard shot. But the inference, I'd say then the inference to the best explanation kinds of knowledge, that's much different. That's like those 50-yard shots where you really have to be careful. So I don't know. I don't know if I answered your question. That makes sense to me. I really like your rational presupposition. I think I'm going to go that route.
Okay, I think I would like to use, this is a really good analogy, because I think if you think of reason is the tool. We all have the tool.
Yeah.
And clarity is the barn, okay? The barn side. If you're using the tool, you're going to hit the barn. But there are levels of understanding. I mean, we start with some things are clear, but you know what? We want to gain first meaning, and then true beliefs, and then knowledge, and then understanding. So this is like the shot that's farther away. And then we want wisdom, which is application. So there are levels. I mean, to say some things are clear isn't to say you understand. Let's say a 15-year-old kid is like, yeah, I do understand. It's clear that God exists. I don't know that they're going to be able to get on Tim Stratton's FreeThinking Ministries show and, do this. It takes training.
Right.
So thinking takes training, and that's what logic class is about. That's what, I try to make these podcasts to inspire my students to be better thinkers. I don't know if they really watch it, but there is a sense in which you have to learn how to use the tools that you're born with. You got these tools, you can use them well or you can use them poorly. So I think it's a good analogy.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, good. I just, I kind of was thinking about that over the last few days, so I'm glad you like it.
I like it.
I haven't written on it or expressed that ever before today. So
yeah, so we have the tools, we have the target. Let's train ourselves to hit that target. And the
I like
target, when you hit the target, you get knowledge and understanding and wisdom, and those are things we need as human beings.
Yeah, and what is the word for when we miss the target?
Sin.
That's
Hamartia.
right.
Missing
That's
the
it.
mark. Oh.
Yeah, missing the mark. Yeah, that's sin. And so at least, I mean, at least in a moral sense, when it comes to moral issues, when we miss the mark, you can call that sin. But I suppose since sin just basically means missing the mark, in a sense, it's sin. Maybe not in a moral sense when we come to irrational conclusions. I don't know. What do you think?
No, I think it is. I tell my students, I think all the world's problems, all of them, are due to the failure to use reason critically.
That's exactly right.
I'm willing to die on that hill.
Yeah.
Look at the world right now. All right. Maybe we should ask one more question. How do you see the relationship between free will and epistemology?
Oh, yeah. Well, like I said earlier, if one is, I'll sum it up like this. If one is causally determined to think and believe X, then one does not possess justification for X, even if it's true. You can't really tie it down. There's no tether there. So I like to say it like this. You can't decide what you ought to believe if something else determines what you will believe. Yeah. And I like to offer a simple thought experiment to make this point, and it kind of reminded me of the quote. I was saying it before I read your quote. When I read your quote, I'm like, yes, this is going to supplement this nicely. But I say, suppose a mad scientist somehow, I don't know how he does it, but somehow he exhaustively controls and causally determines all of your thoughts and beliefs all the time. Somehow he got access to your mind.
You're a brain in a vat.
Yeah, something like that. So this mad scientist then causes and determines everything you think of and about. So exactly what you think of and about, and exactly how you think of and about it. And that's the big one right there. The what you think of and about, and the how you think of and about it. So all your thoughts about your beliefs and all of your beliefs about your thoughts are caused and determined by this mad scientist. And that also includes the next words that are going to come out of your mouth. So then here's the question. How can you, not the mad scientist, rationally affirm the current beliefs in your head as good, bad, better, the best, true, or probably true? And I say, note the range of options from which to choose. How can you rationally affirm the current beliefs in your head as good, bad, better, the best, true, or probably true without begging the question? I say, good luck with that. It's impossible. That is to say, since begging the question violates the rules of reason, it becomes impossible to reason or to rationally affirm the propositions in your head or coming out of your mouth. And then I say, replace the mad scientist with physics and chemistry, God, or anything else, and one has the exact same rationality problems, but for different reasons. And after all, if something or someone other than you causally determines you to affirm a false belief, then it would be impossible for you to infer or affirm a better or true belief. So with all that said, I think rationality needs the PAP, or the principle of alternative possibilities, when it comes to thinking. So I call it the PAP-T. So I think rationality needs the ability to think otherwise, at least occasionally. But it definitely needs the sourcehood version of libertarian freedom. That just simply means not being causally determined by something or someone else. Okay. But this thought experiment demonstrates the importance of being the source of your thoughts. This mad scientist thought experiment here. And your quote that I noted earlier says the same thing, basically. Yeah. So I think it shows the vitality or the importance of being a free thinker. So does that make sense?
Yeah, this totally makes sense. And I think your example also shows the necessity for an epistemology that can support our metaphysics. If we can't know, then we can't know what a human being is. We can't know what human nature is. And we need reason, the laws of thought as a source of authority that's universal for all thinkers, so that we can have a human source of authority, so that we can discuss difficult things like what's going on in culture right now.
And even somebody says, well, you can't know anything. I mean, do you just say, well, how do you know that? I mean, it seems that that's almost It seems to be self-defeating itself.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I don't know. I wanted to turn this around and start talking about critical theory because you're doing a lot of work on this lately. Maybe I should have you back on the show to talk about how epistemology applies to critical theory. But can you quickly tell us, just in a nutshell, maybe fly over what you're doing?
Yeah, I think the importance of everything we just talked about it's the only reason I would wade into this sticky partisan business of social justice, critical theory, critical race theory. I'm a girl of ancient philosophy. That's where I live. And the times are calling for me to be current events. And I think if we're committed to reason and committed to a certain view of human nature and good and evil for human beings, we can apply it to culture and society. So here's in a nutshell what I've been working on. Philosophy since Friedrich Nietzsche has abandoned the notion that reason, the laws of thought, applies to reality or being. And philosophers in the analytic, continental, and pragmatist traditions have all taken what's called the linguistic turn. In a nutshell, reason is a tool that we invented, and it's sometimes called instrumental reason or practical reason. You can learn all about this in my Retrieving Reason podcast on my YouTube channel. This tool of reason can be used as a tool of oppression in the name of objectivity, so say certain people. But really what has taken place in what I call post-Nietzschean philosophy is a redefinition of reason, which is cast in empiricist terms. Reason is science. Reason is technology, rather than the reason is the laws of thought. So I really think we're reaping the rotten fruit of empiricist epistemology. And this has led to fideism in the church and skepticism in the world, which brings us full circle to where we started. We could talk about this all day long, but I do think there's hope. And I think it starts with the church. I hate to say this, but there is hope. We need to repent. And we can talk about repentance as change of mind, change of our way, and we can return to reason. And so I want to say, calling all Christians return to reason, the Logos, and read chapter 1 of John's Gospel and look into that, the Logos. That's also something I read about. Yeah. So I think perhaps using reason will lead us to the good life and maybe even to happiness and solving all the world's problems. So there.
Well, it would. And as the prophet Isaiah said, "Come, let us reason together."
Yes.
Says the Lord, Isaiah 1:18.
Yes.
So you're exactly right. The world needs a heavy dose of reason right now. And that's why I've been telling Christians now is not the time to be quiet. I say be proud, loud, logical, and loving, and speak the truth, bathed in love. Again, truth and love is not something that's 50-50 or 60-40 or 70-30. Yeah. It's 100% of both.
Yeah.
Sometimes I might struggle a little bit on the loving side, but we need to strive to be both logical and loving.
Agreed.
And I think you're doing a great job of that. So,
well, thank you, Tim. I think you are too. And I feel like we've created a kind of new partnership here in reason.
Wow. That's awesome. I'm really excited about that. And I look forward to doing some work with you in the future. Yeah. You have written an article for freethinkingministries.com, and you have an open invitation to send me more whenever you'd like. And we will get you back on the show soon if that's cool with you.
Thank you so much. I would enjoy that. Yes. Yeah.
Well, really, thank you for being the guest on our show today. I've loved this conversation. Been so much fun. And please keep us posted about your new book. When do you think that's coming out?
As soon as I get these classes going online Monday, I hope to have a little time to think. So I have all the podcasts in Retrieving Reason podcast. I wrote transcripts for them. So I'm going to now take those transcripts and edit them into something that's publishable. And I'll run it by my friends first. So you might see an advanced copy and you can give me all your objections.
No, I like it. And I like what you're doing too, because you kind of float a lot of these ideas out there and you see what kind of pushback you get over social media or YouTube. And that lets you know, okay, this is what I need to tighten up. And I did the same thing with my dissertation. I was constantly taking the stuff out there in different atheist groups or Reformed epistemology groups or whatever to see what kind of pushback I would get. But
it's a good practice, run your ideas by others, get feedback, revise. It's good thinking, right? It's part of the careful criterion.
Yeah, you don't want to live in an echo chamber. So,
no, so
at
boring.
least we're going to publish anything. Yeah. So again, thank you. And to our viewers and listeners out there, just one more reminder, make sure to subscribe to the FreeThinking Ministries YouTube channel. Do it right now. Like this video and ring that bell and make sure you share this video until it breaks the internet. I think we're getting close. So also, please keep FreeThinking Ministries in your prayers along with Dr. Burton and her ministry. And if you're so inclined, and even if you're not so inclined, please consider supporting FreeThinking Ministries financially so we can continue to have these awesome conversations on YouTube and across the internet. So until next time, stay tuned and stay reasonable. See you, Kelly.
Take care.